The curtains moved as if someone were standing behind them. At first, she blamed the radiator. The apartment had its own rhythms at night. Metal expanding and contracting, pipes ticking like distant insects, the faint shudder that passed through the walls when someone flushed a toilet 3 floors down. She had learned to translate those sounds into harmless explanations. The building was old. Old buildings breathed. But the radiator was off. She stood in the living room, barefoot on the rug, a mug cooling in her hands. The overhead light was dimmed low, just enough to keep the corners from fully collapsing into shadow. Outside, the city pressed close to the windows, its presence reduced to a dull orange glow and the occasional sigh of passing traffic. The curtains moved. Not a sway, not the lazy billow of fabric caught by a draft. They pulled inward, then settled, as if displaced by a body stepping back. She didn't move. She let the moment sit, heavy and unexamined, the way you do when you're not ready to acknowledge something that might rearrange the rest of your night. The windows were closed. She was certain of that. She had checked them earlier, running her fingers along the latches out of habit more than concern. The air in the room was still, faintly stale with the smell of dust and old coffee. The curtains moved again. This time, she heard it. The soft brush of fabric against fabric, the whisper of fibers sliding over one another. The sound carried too clearly in the quiet, as if the room itself had leaned in to listen. Her skin prickled. She became acutely aware of the temperature, of the cool air settling around her ankles while her upper body remained warm. The mug trembled slightly in her hands. "Stop it," she said softly, to no one in particular. Her voice sounded wrong in the room, too present. It didn't belong to the same space as the moving curtains. For a moment, she considered that she might be tired enough to be misreading things. It had been a long week. Her sleep had been shallow and fractured, the kind that leaves impressions behind your eyes even when you're awake. She set the mug down on the coffee table with deliberate care. The ceramic clinked against glass. The sound felt like an announcement. Nothing happened. She waited, counting her breaths. Inhale through the nose, exhale through the mouth. The way her doctor had taught her years ago, back when anxiety had still felt like something temporary. The curtains hung still, their pattern barely visible in the low light. She almost laughed. Then the left panel shifted. Just an inch. Just enough to break the symmetry. Her heart picked up speed, thudding dully against her ribs. She told herself it was air pressure, some subtle imbalance caused by the building settling. She told herself that fabric could move for reasons that had nothing to do with intent. She took a step closer. The rug compressed under her foot. The sound was louder than she expected, a soft crunch that echoed in her ears. The curtains did not react. She reached out, fingers hovering inches from the cloth. Up close, she could see the fine dust clinging to the weave, illuminated by the streetlight outside. The fabric looked ordinary, harmless. She touched it. It was cool, cooler than the air around it, as if it had been pressed against something cold. She withdrew her hand quickly, an involuntary shiver running up her arm. Behind her, the refrigerator kicked on. The sudden hum made her flinch, a sharp spike of sound in the quiet room. She turned, heart racing, then forced herself to breathe again when she saw nothing out of place. When she turned back, the curtains were still. She stood there longer than she meant to, listening to the apartment assert its normalcy. The refrigerator's steady drone, the faint buzz of electricity in the walls. Somewhere outside, a horn blared, then faded. Eventually, she moved away. She tried to lose herself in routine. She washed the mug, the warm water grounding her, steam fogging the kitchen window. She dried her hands slowly, feeling the texture of the towel. She told herself that if she didn't look, the living room would remain exactly as she'd left it. But when she glanced back, the curtains were parted. Only slightly, just enough to reveal a vertical sliver of dark glass. Her pulse spiked. She stood frozen at the edge of the kitchen, dish towel clenched in her hands. The space between the curtains felt charged now, a held breath that might release at any moment. "Hello?" she called. The word felt foolish as soon as it left her mouth. She wasn't sure who or what she expected to answer. The silence that followed was thick, almost physical. She stepped into the living room again, every sense sharpened. The floor felt colder now, the air heavier. She noticed details she usually ignored. A faint scratch on the wall near the window, the uneven way the floor sloped slightly toward the center of the room. The curtains shifted, not away from her, toward her. She staggered back, bumping into the arm of the couch. The fabric brushed her calf, grounding and terrifying all at once. The movement stopped, the curtains settling into a shape that suggested volume, as if something had been there and then wasn't. Her thoughts raced, overlapping and incoherent. Someone on the fire escape, a trick of light, a muscle spasm in her eyes that had translated into movement where there was none. She rubbed her face hard, pressing her palms into her eyes until stars burst behind her lids. When she looked again, the curtains were still. A laugh bubbled up, brittle and humorless. "I need sleep," she muttered. She turned off the living room light, plunging the space into deeper shadow, and retreated down the hall toward her bedroom. The overhead bulb flickered as she passed beneath it, the brief stutter making her heart jump again. She closed the bedroom door behind her, not slamming it but not easing it shut either. The sound of the latch clicking into place was louder than it should have been. Final. The bedroom felt smaller, safer. The window here faced the alley, its view blocked by brick and a tangle of fire escapes. The curtains were thick, opaque, unmoving. She sat on the edge of the bed and listened. Minutes passed. Her heartbeat slowed. The familiar sounds of the building wrapped around her like a thin blanket. She lay down, pulling the covers up to her chest, staring at the ceiling until the faint patterns in the plaster began to blur. Just as sleep threatened to take her, she heard it, the softest sound of fabric shifting. Not in the bedroom, in the living room. Her eyes snapped open. She lay still, counting the seconds between sounds. Her breath felt too loud, the rush of air in her ears drowning out everything else. She held it, listening harder. Another sound followed, a gentle scrape, like something brushing past furniture. Her mind supplied images she didn't want. The couch, the coffee table, the narrow space between them. The way the shadows pooled there when the lights were off. She squeezed her eyes shut. "You're imagining it," she told herself. "You're tired. This is what tired feels like." A floorboard creaked. She knew that sound. The board near the living room window always complained when weight shifted over it. She'd memorized its voice the way you memorize a loved one's footsteps. The creak came again. Closer this time. Her chest tightened. She considered reaching for her phone, then stopped. The glow of the screen would give her away, mark her position too clearly in the dark. The silence stretched. Then, impossibly, the bedroom curtains moved. Not much, just a tremor, a subtle ripple across the heavy fabric, as if someone had brushed past them on the other side. Her mouth went dry. The air felt colder, pressing in on her skin. She stared at the curtains, willing them to stay still, to return to the inert objects they were supposed to be. They shifted again. Slowly, deliberately. She realized, with a sickening clarity, that the movement wasn't coming from the window at all. It was coming from the room, from the narrow space between the curtains and the wall. She did not scream. She did not move. She lay there, eyes fixed on the fabric, listening to the sound of her own heartbeat thunder in her ears, as the curtains bulged inward by the slightest degree, just enough to suggest that whatever was standing behind them had learned exactly how much pressure it could apply without being seen. And then it went still. The apartment breathed. The night continued, and the curtains did not move back. She woke up on the couch with no memory of falling asleep, and the TV was still warm. She woke to the sound of electricity. Not a noise exactly, more like a presence. A low, steady hum that pressed against her ears and settled behind her eyes. For a moment she lay still, suspended between sleep and waking, her thoughts slow and viscous, reluctant to take shape. The couch beneath her was unfamiliar in a way that made her stomach tighten. The fabric scratched faintly against her cheek, coarse where it had worn thin. Her neck ached at an angle she didn't remember choosing. She opened her eyes. The living room was dark except for the television. Its screen was black, but not dead. She could tell by the faint sheen across the glass, the way it caught and held the dim orange light leaking through the blinds from the street below. The room smelled faintly of dust and something warm, electronic. She pushed herself upright, joints protesting. A wave of cold slid across her calves where the blanket had slipped sometime in the night. The air above her chest was warmer, trapped and stale, as if the room had been holding its breath. She looked at the TV. Her reflection stared back, pale and distorted. She reached out without fully deciding to, her fingertips brushing the edge of the screen. It was warm, not residual warmth, not the faint memory of heat you might imagine after something had been on earlier. This was present, active. The glass radiated it steadily into her skin. Her heart skipped. She pulled her hand back and flexed her fingers, as if the warmth might cling to them. The TV was off. She was certain of that. The small red standby light glowed beneath the screen, steady and indifferent. She tried to remember turning it off. The memory wasn't there. Her last clear thought from the night before came in fragments. Standing in the kitchen, rinsing a mug, the hum of traffic filtering up through the open window, the vague intention to sit down for a minute before bed. Everything after that dissolved into blankness. She swung her legs off the couch. The carpet felt colder than she expected. The fibers flattened in odd directions, as if she had paced there earlier. She paused, listening. The apartment was quiet in the way cities never truly are. Somewhere outside, a siren wailed briefly, then cut off. A car passed, tires whispering against pavement. Inside, the refrigerator clicked, then resumed its low, steady drone. She stood slowly, the room tilting just slightly as her blood pressure caught up. The coffee table sat a few inches farther from the couch than usual. She was sure of it. She had a habit of aligning its edge with the seam in the rug. Now it was off, just enough to notice. Prickle ran up her spine. She scanned the room. The throw pillow lay on the floor near the armchair. The lamp was angled differently, its cord twisted. Small things, easy to dismiss. She wasn't convinced. She walked toward the TV again, drawn by it despite herself. Up close, she could hear it better now. The faint internal whine of components under load sounded busy. Her thumb hovered over the power button on the remote, which sat upside down on the couch cushion. She didn't remember leaving it there either. Before she pressed it, the screen flickered. Just once. A thin horizontal line of static cut across the glass, then vanished. Her breath caught. The red standby light did not change. She stepped back, heart pounding now, and laughed under her breath. The sound came out wrong. Too sharp, too loud in the stillness. "It's old," she muttered. "You're old." The TV did not respond, but the warmth persisted. She went to the kitchen, needing distance. The tile was icy under her feet. She flipped on the overhead light and winced as it flickered before settling into a steady glow. The clock on the microwave read 3:12 a.m. That didn't make sense. She had gone to bed before midnight. She was sure of it. She always did. Work in the morning demanded it. The idea that 3 hours had passed without her awareness left a hollow feeling behind her ribs. She poured herself a glass of water. The tap ran too loud. She drank quickly, the cold grounding her, and then stood there longer than necessary, staring at the reflection of the light on the counter. When she returned to the living room, the TV was different. The screen was still black, but the glow had changed. It was brighter now, pulsing faintly, as if something behind the glass were moving. She froze. The hum deepened, dipping into a lower register that vibrated subtly through the floor. The air around the TV felt warmer than the rest of the room, a soft gradient she could sense as she approached. "Stop," she whispered, unsure who she was addressing. The screen flickered again. This time, the static lingered. Shapes emerged, indistinct at first, like shadows behind fogged glass. The image stuttered, resolving and collapsing in on itself. She saw a corner of the room, skewed and grainy. Her living room. The angle was wrong, too low, tilted slightly to the left. It took her a second to realize what she was seeing. The view from the couch. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She stared at the screen as the image stabilized, the colors muted and off balance. The camera shifted slightly, as if adjusted by an unseen hand. On the screen, she lay asleep on the couch. Her mouth fell open. The room felt suddenly too small, the walls pressing in. She watched herself breathe, slow and deep, one arm hanging limp over the side of the cushion. The throw pillow slipped from her grasp and fell to the floor. She remembered that part now. A faint audio crackle came through the TV speakers. Beneath it, she heard the room sounds layered over one another. The refrigerator hum, distant traffic, the soft tick of cooling plastic. All too close. The image jumped. The viewpoint changed, drifting closer to her sleeping form. The movement was careful, deliberate, as if whoever or whatever was holding the camera knew exactly how much motion would go unnoticed. Her stomach churned. "No," she said, louder now. Her voice echoed faintly off the walls. On the screen, her sleeping self stirred. The warmth from the TV intensified, heat blooming against her face. She took a step back, then another, until the edge of the rug pressed into her heels. The image cut abruptly to black. The hum continued. Her hands shook as she reached for the remote again. She pressed the power button. Nothing happened. She pressed it again, harder. The standby light remained red, unblinking. The TV was hot now. Not just warm, hot enough that she could feel it radiating across the room. The smell of heated plastic and dust grew stronger, metallic and sharp. She unplugged it. The screen stayed black. The hum did not stop. Her breath came shallow and fast. She stumbled back, heart racing, as the realization crept in, slow and unwelcome, that the sound she was hearing was no longer coming from the television. It was coming from the couch, from beneath the cushions, where the fabric still held the faint impression of her body, warm and waiting. She stood there in the dark, the city murmuring on outside, as the hum deepened, steady, patient, like something replaying a moment it wasn't finished with yet.